however you see fit. Good morning, everybody. I want to thank you for joining us this Sunday morning. This is the third day of our policy summit. It is not the last day because we have agreed that we need to build out a great agenda and to continue our bridge building, not only across the Ohio River Valley, but across this United States, because we have people hurting everywhere. But I just want to celebrate this weekend. I want to celebrate each and every one of you who have joined us. I want to celebrate your voices and hearing your stories. I want to thank you for allowing us to witness you, to hold you, to hear you, and now to just purposely build with you. We cannot do this without you. You know what they say, we cannot have community without you. And so we are building such powerful community with you. I am so honored today that we will be talking about the state of our communities and the moment that we are in. And joining me in this conversation is some phenomenal women. Jacqui Patterson, founder and executive director of the Chisholm Legacy Project, a resource hub for Black frontline climate justice leadership, former executive director of the NAACP, elected official and community organizer, as I love to call her, Commissioner Reverend Erniko Brown, founder and executive director of OURS, which stands for Organized Uplifting Resources and Strategy. We have Melanie Meade, a community naturopath and organizer, and our lead for Black Pittsburgh. Also joining us is attorney Ardie Griffin, policy analyst and legislative director for Emerald Cities Collaborative, and Nora Elmarzouky, who is the senior energy democracy manager for Emerald Cities Collaborative. And last but not least, Shana Goggins, community organizer for Kentuckians for the Commonwealth and licensed professional counseling associate. I want to thank you all for joining us today. And I'd just like to ask, how are you? How you doing, ladies?
Excited to be here with y'all.
Thank you. So in our state of communities and the moment we are in conversation, I would like to travel into some unlikely places for our discussion. I want to unpack how climate, environmental injustice, degenerative policies deepen erasure, invisibility, harm to women, those suffering with HIV, AIDS, and the opioid crisis, food insecurity, energy burdens, lack of public policy, mental health, Black and Brown grief and death, the state of poverty in the Black and white experience, cultural trauma, and how we move from organizing to policy to an elected official. The goal today is that we begin to humanize our experience, that we begin to out-imagine, not reimagine, but out-imagine the way that we do justice. Today, I feel a clarion call to identify new ways of fighting for justice, a call to heal, build, and restore, repair, and reclaim justice in a way that looks so different from what we have been accustomed to. And I want to thank each of you in advance for lending your voices, expertise, will, desire, and person to broaden this lens. To start us off, I want to ask each and every person, each and every speaker here, for you to share what this moment means to you, what it looks like to you in your communities. So Jacqui, what is this moment calling for and calling us to? And how should we be thinking about things going forward?
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and it is a pleasure to be here with you all and an honor to be here with you all. When I think about this moment, I think it calls for revolutionary love. When you talk about the clarion call to action, in order for us to really see our interconnectedness, to see the power that we have when we act as one, we do have to ground ourselves in revolutionary love. I see that we need to start to think about the values that bind us. And there's so many more in terms of values that bind us when we kind of cut away the political things, when we cut away all these other unnecessary barriers, unnecessary divisions, and really focus on common values. We all want clean air to breathe. We all want clean water to drink. We all want our children to be safe. We all want to be safe ourselves. We all want self-determination. And so these are common values. I don't think you can say that anyone doesn't want clean water to drink, doesn't want their children to be safe, doesn't want themselves to be safe, doesn't want to have agency in our lives. And so if we really focus on those things, so much more becomes clear and so much more becomes possible. I think we also have to really ground ourselves in the reality of abundance versus the myth of scarcity that drives so much of the division. You know, the whole replacements theory is really based on this myth of scarcity. And so we recognize that there is abundance. And again, if we start to think about one another and our interdependence, and that, you know, all for one, one for all, and then we can start to really harvest the abundance and the regenerative abundance, as opposed to fighting over this perception of scraps. And so I think those are some of the things that the kind of mindset that this moment calls for. If there's others, I'll stop there for the moment.
Oh, thank you so much. And that question is posed to each person who is a part of this conversation. So Melanie, what does it mean? You know, what is this moment calling for and calling us to? You know, how should we be thinking about things going forward? And I love how Jacqui talked about this element of revolutionary love and interconnectedness.
Yes, thank you so much, Jacqui, for bringing us into this space and with that overwhelming posture. You mentioned earlier, Bishop, about being unapologetic. So when I heard what Jacqui said, I thought, wow, we are able in this time to create a light as a feather life and workspace while advocating for rights, as well as fighting against injustice. We can see the balance and the harmony in this, as well as elevate others and not take away from ourselves. I see the power in each and every one of us as women, because we are feisty and we're not going to take what they say, you know, whoever they are, we're going to come together. And so seeing this and being present in it is inspirational in this moment. And I know that it will motivate and inspire others, because they will look on to see that it's possible. They'll look on to see that it's doable, and they will see in each and every one of us the benefits that it has in our lives, spiritually, and as well as our professional lives. So I'm very thankful to be here in this moment. I'll pass it to Shana.
Thank you, Melanie. I'm going to echo what Jacqui said, but I'm going to plus one that, if you will. Sorry, words lost me for just a quick second. Jacqui talks about, you know, things that we have in common. And this was echoed yesterday by a gentleman who joined us. In that, long story short, I taught an introductory course in Appalachian Studies. And as a person of color teaching a course that is traditionally considered about a space or a culture that's majority white and not mine, I did exactly what Jacqui talked about. And I thought about the things that I value and the things that other people value. And Loyal Jones, he did us a solid in that he wrote a book. And it's essentially simply titled Appalachian Values. And if you go through that book, he makes a list of all of the values that Appalachians share in common. Love of land, love of community, you know, all of these things that we've talked about over the course of not just this weekend, but our planning series. And I think we really need to use that as a guide, in that the values and consideration that we have for one another, it's not ethnic specific, it's not racially specific. And as Appalachians, in some degree, we try really hard not to categorize ourselves in terms of race and ethnicity. We look at ourselves as a whole, as a collective. So I think that, you know, one of the most important things that we need to talk about are what are the things that we have in common. Yes, we know there's lots of things that separate us and there's lots of things that divide us. But I think when we take the time to sit down and lay those all out, we'll find that at the center, there are things that thematically that we value and that we appreciate and that we want to uphold. So that's really the foundation of the work that we have to do. You know, as Jacqui and Melanie and so many out throughout this weekend have pointed out, yes, I am a person of color. However, I'm an Appalachian. And, you know, on any given day, which one affects me more? I don't know. My identity or the physical space that I occupy. I don't know that we'll ever settle that out, but it's really irrelevant in that it doesn't matter that as a Black person and as an Appalachian, there are things that I find that are important and significant. And there are many other people out there that find those same things significant and important. And that's our community. That's how we build on that. So thank you for allowing me the opportunity to say that. And I'm gonna pass it to Erniko because I would love to hear what they have to say.
Good morning, everybody. For me, this moment is everything. When I heard what Bishop Marcia said prior to us coming in, it's a moment of collaborative manifestation and how we're all in this moment and how we are all working for the common good and the betterment of individuals, right? We're working on the shoulder of our ancestors, and it's really on behalf of humanity. And so I feel like we're moving in sync toward collective liberation for all of us. And it looks different for everybody, but at the heart and at the center of everything that we do, we're one together. And so I feel like there are many hearts beating, but all to the same tune. And so for me, this moment is a beautiful moment that I'm absolutely delighted in sharing with you all. And the fact that it is so many women doing this thing. You know what I mean? It's not a paternalistic environment right here. It's all love. And when we take away, like, I feel like I have to lead, or, you know, it being a male-dominated society, when you have women who can understand, and like, we just need to get it done and we need to do it in love. We need to operate and lead in love. It makes a difference. So it's easy to be here and be present with you ladies this morning. And I'm so grateful to have this moment in time to share with you all. And I will pass it to Ms. Ardie.
Thank you, Erniko. Just really want to resonate on what you just said of leading with love. I actually have written on my mirror, lead with love and kindness, because I always want to remind myself, first, I need to lead with love and kindness to myself, but then also leading with love and kindness as I move through the world. So just really, really appreciate you saying that. And then just also want to just appreciate everything that everyone has said thus far, moving together as a collective and understanding our oneness, and just really reminding ourselves that we don't have to do this work alone. I think prior to me joining ECC, I was so inundated with heavy feelings of how things are going and working and moving and not moving fast enough or not changing fast enough, and just feeling the weight of how is it possible to do this by myself, and to come into a space where everyone's like, you don't have to do this alone. We are moving together. We are working together, and just to sit in this space and to know that there's so many people across this country, as Bishop Dinkins was saying earlier, that we are all coming together collectively to move in this space. And I just really appreciate that. So you guys said it beautifully. I don't know if that was as well articulated, but but yes. So I will pass it to Nora.
Good morning, everyone. A lot of what's been shared already from everyone really resonates with me. I'm with Emerald Cities Collaborative, and since mid-March, and one of the things that's really exciting is seeing and connecting so many groups across the country who are really grounded in community work that is grounded also in physical space, identity that crosses that crosses across the country. And I think this is a moment where this collectivity is designing against the systems of oppression that were designed to keep us excluded. And when I hear more and more groups who are doing these things and connecting and learning from each other and finding similarities and commonalities across not just the country, but across the globe. We've been hearing about uprisings everywhere, including Panama, Sri Lanka, and all for the same things that we're calling for here, right? Affordable energy and food, and having access to renewable energy, and being able to make our homes, rebuild our homes, repair our homes, displacement, you name it. We have a global struggle, and to just end really thinking about the climate crisis knows no borders. And while we work in community and build our community, and every community has its own issues, not to discount that, not to wash over that, right? But the climate crisis is something that can really bring us together because of that no border. Our borders are man-made, literally man-made. And so, we're at a moment to build the systems that work for our communities and allow our communities to thrive. And that brings me hope when I hear from the organizations who are working on the ground, organizing and seeing wins in places too. That's, while it feels bleak so often with these policies that are being created, there's also so much hope in this ability to connect. And I see that over the years working in climate, more and more groups are beginning to really connect over space and time and identity. I'll pass it back to Bishop Marcia.
Thank you so much. What I kept hearing over and over again, number one is just this how Jacqui started us out with this revolutionary love, or radicalizing love in such a way that we recognize and acknowledge that we have, more in common than we do differences, that we don't have to have a struggle story. We don't have to compete, inside of our stories, because, each one of our stories matter, and each one of them has a life, all of its own. But then there's like this love in common, that we're working through this lens of love in common and this collaborative manifestation. And for me, that's like this bright light, this big star that's kind of shining and illuminating in the work that we do. And then how, Melanie mentioned, being able to work light as a feather. I don't think we've even learned how to do that, especially, someone mentioned that, this is all women doing this, or the voices of women today. And we don't often know how to operate, light as a feather, because we have been taught that we have to be load-bearing walls. But realizing we don't have to do that. And Nora, just building up on, what you mentioned, this is a global struggle, and climate, the climate crisis has no borders, and in that it's not only happening here domestically, but, globally, this climate fight and this climate crisis. And so I'd like to just kind of build up, Jacqui, I know that you have, done a lot of work around bringing a women's rights lens to climate and environmental work. You also, I read a chapter in a book, forgive me, I don't remember the name of it, but you talked about, these things, even from the place of your homeland, this place-based type of work that we have to do. And so I want to ask you, why is this so critical, especially as we look at, the way things are today, even with policy making? How do we bring a women's rights lens to climate and environmental work?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so first, as you say, the fact that we are all here on this call this morning just says something in and of itself. Like, we are, particularly as Black women, just are holding it down for our families, our communities, our organizations, the movement, in the case of Alabama and Georgia, for like democracy itself. And so there's just so much there. And in terms of our leadership, and how much we take on and how much is put on. And so us, and And also, I think, well, in that vein, I don't know if folks know that book. I think it was from the 80s, This Bridge Called My Back, that really tells that story. And so with that, there's that, and there's also the ways that, in terms of our leadership, there's also the ways that we are disproportionately impacted by environmental and climate justice in particular, whether it's the violence against women that spikes after disasters, which we're seeing that are happening more and more, whether it is the endocrine disruptors that are part of the toxic facilities that we are disproportionately exposed to as Black folks. We know that an African-American family making $50,000 a year is more likely to live next to a toxic facility than a white American family making $10,000 a year from the work of Robert Bullard. So we are not even above and beyond income. We are disproportionately exposed to toxic facilities. But again, we do know that we are the ones who are rising every time. And whether it's the leadership of all the folks who are on the call and the leadership of so many Black women who are doing this work. But that's also a call to care for Black women, because there's so much often this kind of preaching to do self-care, when we know that just almost by nature, we're putting ourselves last every time. And that's, you can't just kind of say, well, we told her to do self-care, saying that over the grave. We have to actually recognize that we need to practice organization care. We need to practice community care and movement care of Black women who are on the front lines. We have to institutionalize the caring practices, whether it's making retreat space and residencies available, whether it's making healing spaces and practices available, whether it's making coaching available, or just setting up ways that we can, when we were doing focus groups as a Chisholm Legacy Project, to hear more from Black women in terms of what they need to feel cared for, held. And at the end of one of the focus groups, they said, we just need this to just be able to talk to folks who understand, who see us, who hear us, who feel us, who are holding us. And so these are the kind of things we need to be thinking about. But going also back to policy as well, we are part of the Black Women's Roundtable and put together an entire policy agenda for how do we policy make in a way that holds the rights and the needs and the leadership of Black women. So those those policies are everything from reproductive justice policies to making sure that there is support for ensuring that Black women aren't just holding down the work, but also have decision-making authority. So looking at ways that we're supported to be in political office and so forth. So I'll just stop, not pause. But those are just a few of the examples and considerations that I think of when I think about this intersection of gender justice and women's rights in this work. So I will pass it to Melanie again. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that all of what you said, of course, is sufficient, and it helps to give us a greater lens and focus. What we have to do with the love that she talked about, the revolutionary love, and the individuality of treatment. I think that everyone has a different situation. Each community and each experience will have something different and alternative, so that we have to be available to provide it and know who to connect with to make sure that it inspires the people to take action. I think that we see a lot of protests, but we don't see the result of some policy coming through that works for us. So to inspire the hope that Erniko mentioned in others is to actually show them which types of action will create the changes that we need to see. And I think that will encourage and bring more people to this table, and in a more dedicated and focused way to be revolutionary. And I will pass it to Nora. You're next on that.
I'm going to keep it really simple and really just say it's up to us to follow the lead of Black women who are leading this work. And, you know, I think at this stage, you know, Black women have always led in so many different ways in making a world that is inclusive and better for all. And I think, yeah, just to kind of recapture, we need to have more spaces and continue to support the spaces that support leadership and community and follow the lead of the work of so many Black women such as yourselves. And I'll pass it to Shana.
I'm going to be like Nora and keep it fairly simple in that women of color, white women, all women in Appalachia, this is not new to us. This is, you know, again, this is the foundation from which we've come from. So I think in addition to continuing to show up in the way that we have, it's also not being hesitant to ask other people to lead with us, right? And as Jacqui pointed out, I really appreciated her comment about self-care, like telling someone to take care of themselves while they're standing over their final resting spot, right? The irony. I've gone back and forth with like, I'm just going to go full charged. And then I've also gone back with, no, I don't need to do any extra than what I've already been doing. So I think it's a mixture of, if you've already been doing this, then keep doing it and surround yourself with people that are present in this group and so many other groups so that you're validated, right? In that one, I had a friend who said, you never pray for patience because all you get are tests and challenges to demonstrate the patience that you already have. And maybe that's where we're at right here too. We've been doing this work for such a long time. It's been recognized and it's not been recognized. And I think we've at least finally come to a place that we don't need everyone to recognize what we're doing. We just need to know that the people that we're trying to have contact with and the people that we're trying to aid, they are aware that we're here. So shifting your energy and shifting your focus. And like Nora said, just following what is already there. Listen to impacted people, follow impacted people, and then also don't ask impacted people to do additional work. They're already doing it. Maybe you need to, you know, do more with them. So I'm going to pass it to Ardie. Oh, poke myself in the eye as well, but sorry.
Well, thank you. I just want to just appreciate everything that you guys have said thus far. I think from my perspective, coming from the legal world and into this space, the idea of self-care was just a radical concept in general. That is not a space that treats people well. Yes. And so I think from me, from my perspective in this space right now, I think I'm just learning from all of you because I am truly, truly trying to dismantle the past beliefs in my mind that have been created from what I've been told up into this point in my life. To hear that we do not have to be load-bearing walls was truly mind-blowing for me. So I'm just going to step back and sit with that. And then I believe I think it's back to you, Bishop Dinkins.
I don't know. Did we hear from you, Commissioner?
And my deepest apologies. I pass it to you, Erniko.
No, please.
No, I actually could have sat out on this one because you ladies have said so many beautiful things. But what I would offer to this space is I like the fact that Nora talked about Black women leading the way, because for me, we are the most present in action, the most connected in love, inspiration, and inclusivity. But we're also the most absent from the conversation and the most left behind in policymaking. And so for me, just recognizing those things in this moment in time, and like we have those things that can resonate with our spirit. And so when knowing those things, what do we do with it? How do we place ourselves in a position that allows Black women to lead, especially when they know how to balance a life, work, motherhood, you know, being an inspiration, all of these different hats, wearing at one time and then still being able to do the work. How do we humble ourselves in our humility to allow Black women to lead? Because as someone stated, they don't need a direction, they have the direction. They just need the resources to make it happen. Thank you.
I just have to take a big breath on that and exhale. You stirred up quite a few things. One of the things is, I don't know if you all did this, but the old saying, trying to make $1 out of 15 cents. We have learned how to make $1 out of 15 cents. And so when you, as Black women, Black men, Black people, people of color, people living in poverty, you know, who are experiencing these adverse effects and impacts, we have all learned how to make do with what we have. And it goes back to what Jacqui said earlier, you know, moving from this myth of scarcity to challenging people to see that we really live in a place of abundance. And COVID showed us that on so many levels, that we are really living from a place of abundance. And we have just been backed into the wall and accepted the scraps of scarcity because of the fact of what we have been indoctrinated to believe. And so when I hear what everyone is saying, we've been indoctrinated to believe, even in the work that we do, like Ardie said, you know, when you go to law school, you are deconditioned to be reconditioned, and you have to look at life in a whole different way. When you are an organizer who's boots on the ground and you are intermingling and becoming intertwined with people's pain, you lose yourself inside of that and you forget. You don't even know how. First of all, you don't know how to stop, because you feel like you're abandoning people who are in pain. And so to do that, you're guilting yourself rather than caring for yourself. And then this conversation around a caring justice, they still approach that from an engendered lens, because they say women care about, you know, we're sensitive, we're radical nurturers and love, you know, lovers of the heart and all of that. And you know, men, you know, they care about these, we care with, they care about. And so at the end of the day, they're looking at, hey, you know, in this place, I'm the breadwinner and I'm this. And, you know, this is why policies are so deficient, because they don't have a caring heart. They don't care about what happens to the person. This is why we have a criminal justice system that's jacked up, because it never had a heart in the first place. It didn't just get to this place. It never had a heart in the first place. When you think about Plato and Socrates and Thucydides and all of those people who were sitting here trying to distinguish what justice is and how to use a system against the people that they don't like. And so when we come to this place, at what point in time have we ever really defined what self-care? And I move beyond self-care, because we need soul care right now. How have we been able to define what self-care and soul care looks like for us? How many times in our work have we paused to just say, you know what, we're not doing anything today but caring for ourselves and one another. We're going to radicalize and revolutionize love starting today. Because even the people who are talking about a justice of care is not us. They're still defining it. And we're still getting the message of scarcity. And they're walking the pathway of abundance. And so for me, it's like when we stop to take care of ourselves, we get to stop and see what's in front of us. We are missing everything because we are in such a state of urgency and anxiety that we miss all of the other things. And they're going, you know, so we're going around picking up the crumbs. I won't even say scraps. And we take this, and I've said it, I've been deep, stupidly deep. Well, it doesn't matter, because the crumb has the same ingredients as a loaf of bread. You know, but now that I think about that, I want to slap my own self, because why should I settle for a crumb? Why should I have to lick my finger for something that won't even satiate my need? But this is what we've been taught. And so I can appreciate coming into this place where we are really bringing forth what reality is. And the fact is, we have been taught, but we don't have to live that way when we have so many more examples, Black Wall Street and so many others that have shown us that we have ability and capability to move beyond a narrative that has only desired to oppress, suppress, and depress us. And then, as you're talking, I have to bring the church into this. And we got to bring the church into this as well, because white supremacy is sitting on the pew, under the pew, while Black supremacy is preaching over the pulpit because of the fact of the indoctrination that we carry. You got a big old picture of, I ain't going there, y'all, but you got a picture of somebody that still depicts that the only way you can be saved is when you, but I'm gonna leave that alone because we're trying to bridge build. We're bridge building in this. But the reality of the matter is we got to step in all places. If we're going to revolutionize something, let's look in every corner, every creek, every crevice, and awaken some of them dead bones, some of them dry bones. And we got to awaken them in the church. And I appreciate Apostle Dr. Ford and Apostle Dr. Pressey, because it is men and clergy like them that we need to help us, even in the space of faith, of the faith community, to support the voices of women, to make space for us to organize and do it together and be a covering inside of this space. Because let's be real, a lot of pain has come from the church too. Old pain has come from the church. Scarcity has come from the church, because the church say, give me your offering, but the church don't make an offering. I'm gonna stop y'all because I'm getting in trouble on this Sunday. They might take away they might take away some of my credentials, but I don't care. The point of the matter is the church can take a 10th, but where does the church tithe? Who does the church tithe to? When we're talking about things about poverty and scarcity, there are so many avenues that we get to eliminate poverty and scarcity. There are so many ways that we get to deal with those things in our lives. You can't have a church with vacant land and the only thing you're doing is mowing it rather than planting on it. I'm gonna keep on moving on, y'all. Let me stop. So when I think of these things, I have to confront this place of Black grief, Black pain, Black death, poverty, white pain, white grief, white death. Because we can't say that, these experiences are not interconnected. And so, Shana, I want to ask you, you speak about the culture, you speak about, this thing about essentialism that tries to take place inside of the Appalachian region when we really need to be dealing from an anti-essentialist perspective. But when I think about this, the work that you do, and then I would like for, Jacqui to kind of piggyback off of you, but we're looking at crisis after crisis, and the grief that sits in the rural and Appalachian regions. But then there's these crises that really we don't have, like climate, as Nora mentioned. There is no boundaries, there's no borders. The opioid crisis is a crisis for all of us. HIV and AIDS is a crisis for all of us. Domestic violence is a crisis for all of us. Incarceration, a crisis for all of us. And like Nora brought up, the global crisis, all of us. So Shana, being a mental health professional, how do we begin to, as we're doing this thing of confronting harm, and we're talking about self-care and soul care, how do we heal the hurt while we're hurting? I have to ask, how do you organize people in their pain, out of their pain? What do we do?
You always ask me the hardest questions. No, you're fine. You're fine. But it's a good question, right? Like part of it is we have to be uncomfortable. We have to be comfortable with difficult conversations, and hard questions is a part of that, right? So how do we heal while we're hurting? I think part of that is to acknowledge while we're hurting, to acknowledge that we are hurting. I have a friend, and instead of like really fully acknowledging or addressing like things that are bothering him, like on a deep emotional level, he just kind of stuffs it away, right? Like it's not there, it's not happening. And that's not really helpful because it just keeps coming back. Like an unresolved issue will always reappear. So I think first of all, we have to acknowledge that we're hurting. And I think then secondly, we have to stop doing a thing that human beings are so good at, which is compartmentalizing our pain and our hurt and also ranking it. Like all of us can just have a bad day. It can be a bad day on different levels, but my pain is not greater than Jacqui's pain. It's not lesser than Melanie's pain. So we've got to stop ranking the hurt and just recognize that all hurt, all pain, it's all hurtful. And then I think another part of this is I'm of the age that I'm old enough to learn things every day from TikTok. And there's a lot of wisdom that's being shared via TikTok. But in a TikTok I saw recently, the young lady was talking about privilege. And really the easiest way to define privilege is that it is based on your lack of exposure. And so many times we also have conversations or make decisions about how people should respond to their pain based on what we think that we know, even though it's not a thing that that we've been exposed to or experienced ourselves. So, Nora, yesterday, I mentioned a couple times that she was the expert, and I appreciated her saying, that she knows what she knows, but by no means is that exhaustive. And so to tie that back in is that we are all experts in and of ourselves, right? Like Crystal shared yesterday that no one can tell you that your story is true or false. It's your story, you know it. And that goes the same with pain and reconciliation. Each of us can say what it is that we need. And so the people on the other end of that's being shared to, they have to accept that and they have to acknowledge it. We have to stop trying to pick it apart based on what we understand and what we've been exposed to, and just look to that individual that's sharing their pain or their trauma with us. Many times people don't want you to tell them that that was pain or trauma. They know that. They want, again, it's validation. It's about being validated. It's about feeling like you're heard. And it's about feeling as though your situation might be unique and different, but it's still important, it's still valued, and it still fits in with the collective. And I think when we talk about reconciliation and healing, it might sound cliche, but we need to know our lanes, right? I was recently in a situation where I might have been speaking about things that were not specific to my culture. And I kind of joked and said, I only represent the Black delegation, right? Like I can only speak about what I know as a Black person. I can't speak to another group and what another group may need or want. So I think it's important to make sure that you're staying in your lane and talking about the things that you know. I can only talk about what people of color have experienced. And even within that, it's a very limited pool and it's a very limited story because I only know what it looks like for me in the Commonwealth of Kentucky in the spaces that I've been in. And it's good to make generalizations, but at the same time, it's very hurtful because there might be people who don't see their experience represented in those generalizations, so they feel as though they're excluded. It really comes to, I think, with acknowledging your privilege, taking ownership of any missteps that you've made along the way. I'm also old enough to appreciate that younger generations are centered in different things than I've ever been centered in. So there's lots of new things that I'm having to learn. And that is okay. I'm going to speak for people that are over 40 because I'm 46. Sometimes we're kind of stubborn and we're kind of set in our ways and we don't want to learn and we don't want to hear new things. And as Melanie has pointed out, we are living in a global pandemic, so no rules apply anymore. Time is just a concept. It has no meaning. And the most valuable lesson that we've learned as a collective, as a society, is that no is a complete sentence. And that it is okay to say no. It is also okay to say that you don't understand. It is also okay to ask for help. It is also okay to ask for clarification. It's sad that it took a pandemic for us to kind of go back to the points and places that we needed to be just to identify as human beings and to have empathy with one another. So healing and reconciliation, I think from, just a minimalist perspective, you have to acknowledge the position and the privilege that you have that someone else may not have. And you need to strive better to expose yourself to new situations, and also be open to learning about what other people need and or want. Because what I need may not be what Melanie needs, but I should not be the standard. I should not be the model. We should have enough flexibility in however we're addressing issues to incorporate the uniqueness that every individual has. And I'm kind of like Ardie, or someone else mentioned it. I always hope I'm answering your question. And then I get halfway through and I'm like, did I even talk about what you wanted me to talk about?
Yes, you did. Okay. You did. And so I think, I'd like to go over to Jacqui, because when I think about like these unlikely places that we have to, that we look at, where all of these things don't even get addressed, our public health issues, HIV, AIDS, opioid crisis, and all of these, and we don't have a good public health plan either. We don't have a good public health agenda. But how does this, impact our work and play into it? And then when I think about, all of those areas, and then the one thing that came to my mind in the conversation of pain, it took me back to something that I saw on a video, and I think it was in Puerto Rico, and it was a lot of climate devastation. And this lady was crying, and she said, and how am I supposed to adapt to this? And so also looking at inside of that, the things that we are asking inside of our work, or inside of our work and what we're pushing for, to also be mindful that some of this we're asking people to look at pain and adapt to it. Because if my whole place has been devastated, how do I adapt to devastation? How do I even mitigate the devastation? I don't know. So, this is just kind of posturing, for others. But I think, Jacqui, and what you've done, the work around public health crisis and all of that, if you could just build upon, what Shana was saying, and then, Ardie and Nora, if you could just, speak after that, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you. I was thinking, anyway, when you first posed the question, as Shana was speaking, I was thinking of a couple of things, and then now with your now thinking of more things. So I'm trying to truncate this as best I can. I last year I'm on the board of the National Black Workers Center project, and last year I was we're transferring committees, and I called this person who I'd only spoken to a couple other times, but I could tell from just normally her voice is so, she just has a certain energy. And so, so we're kind of in the beginning of a conversation. I said, are you okay? And then she just burst into tears, like just the most abject grief that I had. It was just unbelievable. And so, and I couldn't even kind of make out what she was saying in the beginning. So but what she got to was that she had it in her heart to do 100 gardens in her community, like for Black sisters in her community. And she had gone to one of the sisters' homes, and she wasn't there, and there were cars in the parking lot, the driveway, that were unfamiliar, and her car wasn't there. Anyway, she finally ended up calling and found out that the sister, because she had gone there to kind of tend the garden, because that's what she planted these gardens, and then she actually takes care of the gardens for the sisters. And she found out that the person had passed away from COVID. And I think she was just overwhelmed, not only about the person, but also about our community and what it meant in terms of just the losses in our community. And on the very same day, I was talking to a recent mayor who was part of the American Association of African American Mayors Association, and she had gotten a letter from one of the Black female mayors, and that letter had her in tears as a mayor just shared all the things that were going on and her challenges with what was going on in the community that she served. And each of these things just makes me think of kind of, again, the overwhelm and the grief that we talked about, the number of issues that we have going on. I was working in one of the communities, Uniontown, Alabama, and I was there. They were dealing with this pollution in the community, and one of the leaders was not only dealing with the pollution in the community, but also the incarceration of her son. A friend of mine who is working on patient safety in the hospitals is dealing with her son having just overdosed. I was doing a workshop on energy justice, and we were talking about shutoffs, and one of the people there was a trauma-informed nurse, and she talked about how so a family came into her care because their home had burned down, and the reason they came into her care is because the young boy who was 9 years old, actually, when the house had burned down because of a space heater, and it's because his mom, when the oil and gas had been cut off, she put the space heater in his room, and he felt so guilty because about the house burning down that he tried to commit suicide. As we think about the climate forced migration, and to your point around HIV and AIDS, one of the people that we interviewed in this Women of Color for Climate Justice Road Tour, she talked about her sister who was immigrating from Cameroon, and in the border crossing, she was sexually assaulted and ended up with HIV and AIDS. And so all these ways that these various social issues in our communities intersect and deepen and cause deep layered trauma for us as individuals, as families, as communities, are just proliferate. And it just using another medical analogy, when we think about cancer that is spread throughout our bodies, we can't just take a scalpel and try to excise just one tumor. And so as we think about the ways that we need to address these, it's definitely rooted in the healing justice work. It's rooted in all the ways that we care for each other, but it's also rooted in the need that we need to transform our whole society from an extractive society into, an extractive economy into a living economy, into a caring economy, because we know that we could have, as we're part of a network called the Cancer Free Economy Network, we could actually re-envision our economy and our society in a way that these things don't proliferate as they do, because so much of all those problems that I just talked about, whether it's the immigration crisis because of our strong immigration standards, whether it's the HIV and AIDS crisis, is because of so many of the drivers of HIV and AIDS are rooted in our societal kind of rugged individualism and so forth. And so we can just name all the roots of all these different things. And if we don't actually deal with the roots, then we're going to continue to have these layered traumas in our community. So that's all to say, we really need to go back to what we started off with in the beginning, in terms of interconnectedness, in terms of revolutionary love, in terms of rethinking and taking radical transformation of a society so that it is one that uplifts human rights, earth rights, and recognizes, again, our interdependence and lives from a place of regeneration and abundance. So that's all kind of high level, but it's also basic in another way. So that's what I would just kind of say. Not as briefly as I would have liked, but thank you.
No, we needed to hear all of that. And so I'm going to ask if, Nora or, Ardie, would either of you like to expound upon what Jacqui said? Nora, I know you do a lot of work around energy, democracy, but there's also your work around, this cultural organizing. And so when you hear what, Jacqui has said, is there anything that resonates with you, inside of that, in the work that you do on so many levels?
Yeah, I where do I begin? I think I'd like to begin with what Jacqui started off with saying, and regarding my own experience with Bishop Dinkins asking me in the beginning of a meeting, stopping a meeting, not allowing for the meeting to happen before asking me how I was doing, causing me to feel seen, but also provoking deep emotions that I couldn't control. And so creating in every workshop, in every space, in every meeting, a space to check in, to build trust, to be vulnerable with each other. And that is really difficult in spaces where people have experienced a lot of trauma for so many reasons. Outside of the energy democracy work, I do a lot of work in the arts and culture sector and organizing around Palestine and promote, and building community with Syrian and Iraqi refugees, and just like seeing not only the pain of the loss that they've had in being forced to move out of their homes when they felt, when they had family and certain cultural aspects, and then coming here feeling like, this country is the cause of me having to be displaced. But also, just how to navigate that, how to navigate a new culture when you don't have the language capacity. And so how do we build spaces of vulnerability, the ability to really share? I had the privilege to see Bell Hooks speak, one of my, what's the role models, I guess you could say, inspirations in so much of the work that I do. And I remember her saying, we've lost in a lot of ways being able to connect with the folks that are really closest to us in a way to be vulnerable, and have turned really more towards this Western therapy. Which I will say is like, I believe in therapy in the sense that we all need that support. Whether whatever trauma we've experienced on the spectrum, we need that space to be able to process what we've experienced, recognizing, just to the comment that I see, the holistic approach to human development. Uri Brofenbrenner writes about how, as we grow as an individual, we're at the center of so many layers of information that dictates who we are. Whether it's home, school, media, going beyond that to historic trauma that is within our DNA. And how do we process all of these layers and levels to feel that we are a whole person, and building community is also difficult with so much trauma. In Philadelphia, there's a lot of gun violence, as there is in other places, and children are experiencing loss. Children are experiencing, I think I read it was like 1 in 5 children have experienced gun violence in some way. And what does that do to their growth and development? What spaces are we creating for them to process? And unfortunately, we have huge, disinvestment in our education systems, the counselors that exist, therapy is very inaccessible. And just to be able to even begin to articulate what that trauma is a step towards healing. Like I've said before, I've been very privileged to work with so many different groups across the country who are really building that space with their communities and bringing people in different ways, simply by listening, simply by asking, because oftentimes people aren't asked, like Jacqui was saying, right? And So yeah, I mean, that's, I think just to sort of close this out, it's like, once again, sort of what spaces are we creating where people can feel that they are vulnerable and whole and build to the whole.
That was, wow. I can only say thank you, because you brought an element in that, you know, we don't think about. And I used to be an administrator for a daycare. And we had this really mean teacher there. And I remember her yelling at this little baby, and couldn't have been any more like 3 or 4, between 3 and 5, let me say that. And she was just yelling. And I got up and left my office and said, hey, what's the problem? Well, long story short, to your point, Nora, is this young man, this little baby, had just witnessed his father being arrested and taken from him. And, you know, and I said to her, there's a way that you communicate to children. You communicate with them. You don't talk at them, and you don't talk down to them. And it made me think about how, if we just started at that young age, really acknowledging that children are individuals, rather than, you know, those who go get our remote or, you know, to tell what to do, that they are individuals who really have feelings, emotions, and they need to be unveiled. They need to be unpacked. And we wonder why children get in school, and they can't name and claim. They can't even speak to what's going on because of just what you said, the trauma. And so I think, you know, in our work, it behooves us not only to think about children, but also, you know, the space of like disability justice, you know, those that we really leave out, who are traumatized in so many different levels, because we're talking about like the moment that we're in, the state of our communities. And this is the moment that we're in and the state of our communities, where we have to do a deep dive, a deep analysis into really who's left out and how do we begin to bring them into the space too, from language justice to disability justice to youth and countless others. And we can no longer afford to not intersect our work, or as Jacqui put it, we can no longer afford to just operate from a place of dependence and independence when we were created to be interdependent. And that's where we really have stopped at, is when babies are born, they're dependent upon us. They boss us like never before. They do. But then we say, but I'm going to raise them to be independent. And we stop. And if we are going to evolve, then the conversation around interdependence starts in our home, in our communities, and where we are. And we teach people how to build our children, our community. We move in rhythm that way. And so this work is, what I'm hearing is, this work is calling us to a moment of clarity. And what does interdependence look like? Define. How do we radicalize that with a common love, a revolutionary love and curiosity? Not abandonment, not guilt, not shame. And even if they show up, giving people permission to say, it's okay for it to be in the room, and having a set of approaches that don't demean, but that endear and witness and hold. And so I want to thank you, for sharing that, because that's deep. And so that takes me to this point of framing our stories, and how we break down this point of invisibility. And we started here, and like, where do we start? But my question is, how do we speak about it? How do we talk about this? How do we help people to unearth and strengthen them in their stories and strengthen our narrative work from a lens of inclusion and equity? Because we still can't define what equity means even for ourselves. How do we come to this point? And so, Ardie, we haven't heard from you, so I'm going to ask you to kind of lean into that, you Commissioner and Melanie, and then we'll go. And those who just feel like, you have something that resonates, please. But I'll start with you, Ardie.
I think that's a really hard question. And it's something that I think that I really grapple with every day in my work is, how do we think outside of the constructs that we have been confined in for so long to really understand what true equity means. And I think as I've been moving through this work and understanding how, my background gives me the ability to have the privilege to step into spaces that not many people do. And for me, true equity means not having to have someone speak for yourself. The ability to tell your own story and to tell it in the way that you want to tell it directly to the people who need to hear it the most. I feel like what we're doing here with Emerald Cities and trying to connect frontline communities directly to the people in power, so that way they can truly understand their lived experiences, is what equity it means to me. It means ensuring that community has a seat at the table and not just a performative seat at the table, that they actually have a true voice in what is being said and what is being built. And going a step further, not just ensuring that they have a seat at the table, but then also resourcing them to have that seat at the table, to ensure that they have the capacity to show up and to speak on their own behalf. Because I feel like I have, in my career, I've been bouncing around between jobs, and I think the collective, or the one unified thing that I've noticed about every single position that I have traversed thus far is trauma. Is every space that I am in, I am constantly engaging with people who are coming to me through trauma. And so that is always the impetus of our interaction. And so just really want to emphasize the importance of moving with a trauma-informed approach, and ensuring that the people in power are also moving in with a trauma-informed approach, because I feel like there are so many people. I love the way that you explained that, Shana, or the TikToker you referenced, you saying that privilege is the ability to not have been exposed. And I feel like so often the leaders, the people in power, the people in positions of influence are so privileged in the sense that they have not had to experience death, gun violence, losing loved ones to illnesses, these traumas, the living next to an incinerator, living with dirty water. They have not had to experience any of these atrocities, and so they cannot, in their brains, understand what communities are experiencing and facing. And so equity means making sure that they are not protected from our lived experiences. And so that's that as I move in my work, that is really where I am moving in. And I am not the expert of your community, you are. So how can I make sure that I am connecting your experiences to the people who need to hear about it the most, and ensure that they cannot run from their lived experiences anymore. They cannot shield themselves. So that is what equity has meant to me. And then also, Shana, I just want to say I took copious amount of notes when you were talking about healing. So please note that what you said was incredible.
Thank you, Ardie. You're far too generous, because I was sitting here thinking to myself, that was just a jumbled batch of words that were not cohesive and made no sense. So thank you for validating me.
That's a perception, and perceptions are not always real. Shana?
Isn't it a liar?
Yeah, I was going to say that, like anxiety.
Something's a liar. Yeah.
So I know I asked others to expound upon, but I, for the sake of time, would like to move us through, if that's okay with everybody. And want to say you're right. Ardie, is that we do have to have a trauma-informed approach. And so that's something that, I've been working with some national networks and doing that training around that. And then trauma-informed approaches to ministry. I want to go to, I want to ask this question of you, Jacqui. And I think, if we have a few minutes to participate, to go to others, and, Melanie and Commissioner Erniko, others, when I think about this conversation around equity, and again, we speak a lot about it in our work, but we don't really talk about or really dig down into process and procedural equity and what that can look like, especially from a participatory or, with public participation. What would process and procedural equity look like when it engages public participation in the process?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to be super brief because I also want to hear from the other colleagues here. Yeah, I mean, just on some practical examples. I was part of a group where we were talking about the need to really center frontline community voices, and I said we needed to seed kind of decision making and direction to those communities, and people were like, well, I don't know about seeding, like that just felt like too far for them. But that to me is procedural equity. The frontline communities know best. And so we don't just kind of take input or take feedback and then kind of make our decisions otherwise. We actually say, no, you're the decision maker and we're here at your service. And so that from that level to working with groups like the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and saying, your public participation processes where you're getting input, there might be input from the communities that's 99-1 in terms of what industry wants, and yet you're approving the permit in favor of the industry. So what real procedural equity and looks like is actually heeding the call of the community that is going to be impacted by that pipeline or that expansion of that plant's operation or whatever. What procedural equity looks like is saying that a community that is unincorporated, like a community I work with that hasn't had running water since the mid-'80s, they're not considered to be expendable by their local electeds because they don't have the same level of voting participation because they don't feel like they're a part of any kind of democracy. It means that the elected officials are duty bound to engage with this community and act at the behest of that community just as anyone else. So those are just a few kind of hyper practical examples that I would give, and ceding the space back. Thank you.
Is it okay if I come in because that was very powerful for me? I mean, what you say is always powerful, but speaking to that, I just put in the chat about our mayor. I've never seen him walk through the streets of the city. I've never seen him shop in any of the convenience stores, the Rite Aid, the Family Dollars, or the Dollar Generals that we have. That's it. No grocery store for over 35 years. So when you talk about equity, I feel like the naturopath field provided a space for me to bring it all together. As I studied African and Latin American studies, so I was interested in our connections, as Erniko mentioned, that one heartbeat. We're all one heartbeat. And when we realize it through our history, that critical race theory they don't want on the table, then we're able to see we have to create ritual. We talked about looking in the mirror. And in our historical origin, that is known as mirror work. When we talk about those hurts and traumas, that is shadow work. And when we pose those things to children and we put those rituals into place in the whole aspect of life, mind, body, soul, and spirit, work, what do we call, you're going to church and you're hanging out. When you put those rituals into place, then you are able to function at your best and highest level. And I think that what equity has done has diminished that possibility for us. So we have to reclaim that potential that we can discuss food, what it does, and air pollution, because we're not even discussing what Germany and France have already researched and reported maybe 10, 15 years ago. Gun violence is connected to mental health and air pollution. Where is this discussion for us? And when do we get to, well, you provided us the table, so we have the table now. And I thank you for that. So that's what I think that equity can do for us. And I'm thankful for you all.
For me, what I've seen in a lot of the work, because in my 9 to 5, I work for a white-led, predominantly white organization that has made its position to move toward working in environmental justice communities. And so it is, to be blatantly honest, it has been an ongoing fight. I've had several conversations with Bishop Marcia, and just being very honest, I've been wanting to leave this place because we talk about these things and we say these things, and they want to position themselves not for the people, but the funding that comes down. And so it's always a money game, and it's not a thing about how we're really supporting the people, because the people in these communities have their solutions, because these aren't things that have just started. So air pollution is not something that just started. We as people in these communities have learned how to maintain and have learned how to live with these compound impacts, these compound injustices, right? And so we don't need you to come in with a white savior complex and say, hey, you know, we want to save you. It's not that. It is not even being an ally, but it's being an accomplice in the situation. Like, get your hands dirty, breathe the same air that I'm breathing, eat the same food that I'm eating, deal with the same things that I'm dealing with in my community. You know what I mean? And oftentimes people who are in higher spaces like federal spaces, the people who are making the decisions aren't the people who are impacted by the ongoing disparities that people are dealing with. And the note that I jotted down quickly, because I definitely want to hear from somebody else, is oftentimes it's positions of power over the placement of people, and equity brings places the position of power with the people. And I yield back the time to other people.
Can you read that last sentence again? Equity does what?
Equity places the position of power with the people.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking, you know, Ardie, real quick, or you, Nora, you know, especially, you know, knowing that Ardie, you've worked, you know, in government, you know, and just hearing what the commissioner is saying, you know, when you think about this positional power, you know, and how in the way that it's constructed now, it's a divestment rather than an investment, you know, around this conversation of equity. And you know, could you just speak more? I think just kind of expound upon like what the commissioner was saying about these different agencies and agency inequity that produces procedural and process inequities.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was funny when I left. I've worked in a lot of dramatic spaces. I left. I worked in a prosecutor's office from my thinking that it was a place of progress, and that I was going to to change the criminal justice system, and very quickly realized that it was going to take much bigger structural change in order for that to be a different place. But so when I went to state legislature, I thought I was hoping that, this is a place of policy. This is a place of legislation. This is a place where people are supposed to be moving for the people, right? You have these representatives who are elected by their constituents to speak on behalf of their constituents. And I think when I got there, I was just so baffled by the fact that it wasn't about the people, it was about the person. So oftentimes you see people who it was more important to have the job than to do the job. And that is where I think it is, our government is just really, it's failing us. Because from my perspective, there was no equity. As soon as you got there, it was all about the ranking of the officials. Who's your senior legislators, who's your freshman. If you're a freshman, you can't get anything done because you have no power. So, how can you even advocate for your constituents if you're already being told from day one, you are going to be relegated to this position because you haven't put the time and the experience and the fundraising capacity to be here. And so I'm starting to invoke those feelings of just feeling daunted by the task at hand of how do we change those systems? How do we ensure that when people are being elected, they're doing it for the right reasons? And I think that's, where community comes in. Melanie, I think that you said it best when you said we have to reclaim that power. Because we are certainly sitting in a place of people are saying one thing to our face and then they're doing something completely behind our back. Especially when you look at the structure of, state legislatures in general, like they operate from 9 to 5. Well, we don't operate like how are people supposed to participate in that process if we are so caught up in doing our 9 to 5 that we can't engage with them throughout the workday? Why are they meeting? Why are they conducting meetings when we don't have the capacity to be present, to provide that accountability structure and to check them to make sure that they're doing what we are actually advocating for? Why are they holding meetings with, a moment's notice when there's no way that even a representative could even have the capacity to not just understand what they're going to be voting on, but have the opportunity to take that back to their constituents and to say, this is what I'm voting on. How do you feel? Tell me your experiences. What should I do here? And so I think in order for us to change things, I think we need to start advocating that they should be meeting. I think Patricia said it in the chat. They're holding spaces when we cannot participate. And so they're doing it in spaces that are comfortable for them. And in reality, they should be meeting communities where they are, and they should be coming to us at times and places that are convenient for us, and resourcing us so that way we can show up. I feel like I'm meandering my words, Bishop, so I hope this is answering your question or touching on things. I feel like I'm just venting at this point about my my lack of confidence in our structures and our systems, but I think that is why that it was that space that made me realize change is not going to happen here. Change is going to happen with us. And so I need to leave this space and come into this space where I know that I am surrounded by people who are angry and frustrated and motivated to make the changes to ensure that that we are building equity and reclaiming our equity, and not being siloed and being used as a pawn, as we so often are.
I'd like to build on what Ardie talked about, if that's okay. I would take, I agree with everything Ardie has said. I've never worked in government, so I can't speak from a place of experience in government, but some of y'all heard what I'm about to say yesterday. It's not just about creating our spaces, it's about getting our folks into places of power. And I've witnessed and seen our people in places of power both get corrupted, but also really work for the people. You know, I've seen examples in Philadelphia where the Working Families Party kicked out a Republican to be an independent, you know, a non-majority party. You know, that person, along with that person's Kendra Brooks, along with Helen Gim, both activists in the community for years, were able to build the support of the people through their actions and bringing that to city council. In Pennsylvania state, a really difficult state, you know, there have been a few progressive folks who've been elected into state government, Nikhil Saval, Rick Krajewski, who are known as abolitionists, who are known as, you know, fighters, and have taken that into the state legislature. Nikhil Saval hosted roundtables for about a year on the Green New Deal for housing and schooling in schools. And, you know, there is a concern that most of the meetings, I believe, were held during the day, but I don't think all of them. But there was an active desire to engage folks and write a bill based on what folks have said. So an example of what co-governance can look like, getting someone in power that reflects, you know, the work that we're doing, but also working with them to build these policies. And to, in some surprise, I hate to say surprise, but it became a bipartisan bill, the whole home repairs, and it was included in the budget. Getting $50,000 to low-income folks to energy efficient their houses, fix them, put new roofs, you know, weatherization, and also creating a workforce development program that was about bringing people in. And that was created through community engagement with his constituents, but also folks who are not his constituents. And so there are examples out there, tiny examples. I mean, I can only speak for PA and what I've seen, but you know, I guess my point is we need to get our folks in positions of power, encourage people to run and be there as an accountability, to hold them accountable to what we're calling for, what they said, what they worked on calling for, and, you know, to overcome how the system can change folks through corruption and stuff like that. So yeah, last to say, I guess, bringing people into power, positions of power.
No, that takes us, thank you for sharing that, because you're correct. So this takes us to our last two closing questions. Number one, I want to go to you, Commissioner, because one of the things that you are, as you said, 9 to 5, you are a community organizer, but you are also an elected official. And so my question to you today is like, what was it that, why were you led to becoming a public official? And then how did you use your story in the process, to get people engaged and involved and to support you?
Cool. Thank you for that question, Bishop Marcia. So what got me into actually running, first off, it was not planned. I will say that when we had like 2 weeks out from like election day, when you can do like the early voting, I went in and I was getting ready to vote because I travel a great deal for work. And I seen the ballot and it was like, nobody on here represents my community, but often has a lot to say about it. And so I ran a campaign for 2 weeks and I ended up winning. So, and it was like 2 like Facebook ads, but what put me in this position, I've always worked on behalf of my community. I've always done jobs that have been in my community, being a career coach for the state of South Carolina, working in schools here, the Upward Bound program, being a tutor. So all of my work has been surrounded by community advocacy, organizing, being an organizer on behalf of presidential campaigns since I can remember, and recognizing that these people the people who were in positions of power did not represent me, did not represent my ideas, and I had to do something about it. We can always talk about you know, how the system is a corrupt system. We can always say these negative things about the system, but what are we doing about it? And until we step into those spaces, you know, we can have a seat at the table, or we can build and create the table. We can do whatever it is that we want to do, but we absolutely have to be empowered to do those things. And my empowerment came from my story and recognizing that, you know, I come from the country. My story, I was raised by my grandmother who had a 10th grade education, who often told me to get a job, to get an education. That way no one can take that from me. And so carrying that weight of that person who inspired me to do the work that I do, and who framed community for me through the love that was given to me, and realizing that in this environmental space, because I definitely never thought that I would be doing environmental work, but being in this environmental spaces are often or should always center Black people. And so what I talk about with individuals, I got into this space and people were talking about sustainability. And I often say sustainability is a $10 word for survival that Black folks have been doing for over 400 years. And so it's nothing new to me. You know what I mean? And growing up where I came from, you know, like I said, the country. And we talk about this whole mutual aid thing. And mutual aid, for me, 20, 30 years ago, because I'm 35, I've seen it my entire life, has been how if my family had a garden and somebody had something over here, and if they didn't have it, we had it and we had enough, and they shared the same thing. So this world that we are walking into now is something that we've always had. And for me, it's been the life that I've lived. Like we're talking about organic food. Black folks that did that. I've had to walk over to the cow pasture and get a 5-gallon bucket of cow manure to go put over there in the garden. I've had to do that day in and day out. And I've had a garden for 35 years and I'm 35 years old. And so coming from that place and recognizing that environmental work is political work, you have to be a part of what's going on, because if you don't be a part, then you're going to be constantly left out of what's going on. And for me, coming from the country, a lot of people don't even think that I'm a country person. But baby, I put my boots on, I go out to the garden, I tend to the animals, I do everything that I need to do, because this is where I come from. These are the shoulders that I stand on. This is the legacy that has been left for me. And this is the place that I'm most comfortable in. Oftentimes, it's like a recreation of a world where people are whitewashing our history and our legacy. And so I'm standing true and standing in my power and holding white folks accountable for who they are and where they are, and making sure that my story, my legacy is told the proper way. That's it.
Well, I'm just going to say thank you for dropping the mic. I heard it fall all the way over here, and it rattled over here in Ohio. So thank you, Commissioner. To wrap up, right, it shattered some stuff. That was the wrecking ball of the conversation. I want to just, as we close, and in our wrapping remarks, to open the space up for Q&A. Is to start with Jacqui, and then each one of you, you can pass it as you were doing before. But I heard in this last part of the conversation about how, we talked about equity, and then we shifted to the commissioner's sentence about equity having that power. Say it again. I don't remember. I suffer from CRS. Can't remember stuff.
Which one you want? I said a lot.
The equity statement about power.
Oh, equity places the position of power with the people.
Equity places the position of power with the people. And that made me think about every person that has been a part of this panel discussion or this state of community conversation has created that position of power. And so I'd like, I think for me, it's like looking at Jacqui with the Chisholm Legacy Project. How does that build power for the people that you want to do? Melanie, I'd like for you to expound as a natural path. Power. Ardie, as a lawyer and a policy analysis, power. Nora, cultural organizer, power. Shana. And if each one of you can just speak to that, because I think now we are in a beautiful moment but we are redefining power in such a way that we are letting people know you have never been disempowered. And we are creating the spheres of influence, the spheres of the creative power, positional power, just so many levels. So I'm going to be quiet because I want to give people time and take it to you, Jacqui, and then Ardie, Melanie, Shana, you all ping pong it, and then we'll close and have people open the floor for Q&A.
Thank you. That's such a great question to end on. So for the Chisholm Legacy Project, we have kind of 4 pathways to that ultimate end in building power towards Black liberation. With our community building work, we are building power through making sure the communities know, working with communities that are the furthest on the margin, so to speak. So like that unincorporated community that hasn't had drinking water for 40 years, working with them to say, that it doesn't have to be this way, because at that point they had just accepted that this is what it was going to be. And so really facilitating the practice of radical imagination, and not radical imagination as in a utopian fantasy, but as what's not only possible, but what absolutely should be. So working with communities to be of that mindset, and then connecting them to the resources to actually realize the what they want. And so really building power in that sense. Our second way of building power is is supporting the movement, the movement building. So everything from our recently launched Power to the People, policies for the people database that actually puts the power of being able to develop policies. A lot of people think that, oh, we can't develop policies, we can just respond to the policies that are being developed by other people, but no, we can develop policies. And so that's what that database and work is about. Our third piece is bending the mainstream arc towards equity and justice. And so for that, we're really working on getting some of the folks who are in power to step out of the way and actually step behind frontline communities that need to be in power. And then finally, our fourth bucket is around Black femme well-being, so that we ensure that we are seen, heard, felt, and held, and so that we can really stand in our power in a way that centers caring. So I will pass it to Nora.
Thanks, Jacqui. You spoke so organized. I don't have the same organization, and also I'll say so powerfully. So it's a hard follow-up. But what I was thinking about in relationship to this, in terms of thinking about cultural organizing, it's really about controlling the narrative, making our narrative front and center, and using arts and culture to do that, because that in and of itself is bearing witness, it's creating, it's putting work out in the world, visually written in all sorts of ways that, once again, kind of, a theme of this summit has been storytelling and narrative. So how do we bring that together? I wanted to also touch on how do we build power? It's building shared analysis. It's building education and knowledge. I have a friend who works at a school that is for students who've been kicked out of every school, have a lot of socio-emotional issues, and who was talking to a mother about her son going into college, completing the FAFSA. She had no knowledge of this. She didn't know what a loan was. Something that is the basis for so much of building community wealth, building generational wealth through housing, through education, all of these things. And so providing and creating spaces of education and learning and building that shared analysis that people feel not alone. That's been also a common theme, is like, how do we share those stories in spaces we feel safe and comfortable, while also being uncomfortable at times, to build, our collective knowledge together. And I think that is really clear. That is really key. And part of that is supporting folks in realizing their own power as an individual. You have the power to go to a public hearing, tell your story, and make it present. And even the word empower, comes from a place of supremacy. It's like, I bestow upon you the ability to have power. And I still haven't found a better word, but what I like to say is supporting folks in finding their agency and their voice, because no one is voiceless. It's just about creating spaces for voices to be heard, supporting folks and articulating their voices in the ways that are powerful and are brought to these different spaces, to build that table, to build that coalition. I'll pass it on to Ardie.
Thank you, Nora. And just really want to also just echo and emphasize that the points about knowledge or power, building power through education, building power through knowledge, because I think from my perspective and in my journey, the reason why I went to law school was because I was like, I want to know the system. I want to understand the Constitution. I want to understand the laws. I want to know the court system. I want to know how this works. Because if I know how this works, that means I can call them out on their BS when they're not being correct. And so for my work with ECC, that is my goal, is to support communities by arming them with the knowledge that they need when they walk in these meetings. So that way, when the politicians or the leaders start, running down the talking points, they can actually call them out on it and say, no, I know what you're telling me, but I also know what this says. And it says that I get this. So just making sure that people are to know what their rights are and to know what should be coming to them. I think so. This system, the status quo, just depends on the fact that people are uninformed or not, just don't know. And so by arming people with the knowledge and the capacity to advocate for themselves and to walk into these meetings and say, I know it's in this bill, what you're saying is not entirely correct. So let me remind you that I know what it says, and I need you to give me a better answer. I need you to do better. I need you to show up. And so for me, that's building power, is building our collective knowledge, so that way they can't lie to our faces. We can call them out on their BS. And I will pass it to Melanie.
Yes, that I love. That is exactly why I'm in the work of advocacy, right? I mean, that's why we're all here. I was looking for a quote because I know somewhere throughout my studies, I found that there is no power without integrity. Those who are in power who lack integrity aren't powerful. They're using that position. And that's why, you were in this space where you said, I can do something. I can activate change by following the steps or the process. And I think that that's where power comes from. One thing that I do have difficulty with is the system as it exists. Standing on another's land and not acknowledging them will not give us good cause to create something better. We have to go back. We have to look back to see which traditions are honorable, representable to carry forward and share with our children. And we have to involve and engage them so that they are tapped into their power. I live in a community where little boys think trauma is the norm. And if you haven't been through enough trauma, then you aren't a man, you aren't a Black man. And how many of us as women say, if I don't work as many hours, if I don't do as much as the next person, they say I'm not as worthy, or my work isn't complete. So our power is in positioning ourselves to not only empathize with the one outside of us, but within us. And that's what I think, that naturally we are all naturopaths. We all have the capacity to heal ourselves and show others how to heal. Each of us has a talent specific for its own purpose and way. And our Archbishop bringing us here together on this platform is taking down mountains. Sorry, I was getting a little bit, yeah. Okay, so I don't want to take up your time. I could talk on this forever. You all gave me some really motivating, inspiring ways of looking at what I was struggling with for a time. Because I think it was Erniko who mentioned, I wanted to walk away. I've been trying to walk away for so long, but the roots are here. This is my family's land, back to my indigenous grandmother who was Native American, French, and African, and her husband. So this, I'm not standing here advocating for something that doesn't mean anything to not just myself, but for others. There's something going on in environmental justice areas and in every city everywhere called land grabbing. And if we don't have a space to freely talk about it and encourage people as to how to avoid it, then we continue, just like with crime, right? Why do our boys feel that they need to, what is going on? What is the cause for them to feel unsafe in their communities? And then how can we bring them in to discuss it? We need those listening sessions, because I don't think you or I can extract from it. We're not in those streets. So let's be honest and hear their voices where they are so we can meet them, unite, and continue on in our journey. And I think that is the powerful journey of linking together. We are all one. Erniko mentioned one heartbeat. A heart doesn't have a color, or it has, but it's all because of what's in it, what's pumping through it. So if we imagine ourselves as one heartbeat, then we're always together as one. We're never separated, divided, nor conquered. So I'm thankful. This is always empowering. Each of your words are empowering, and I'm thankful that you all inspire me and motivate me to dig deep and bring out my power. Thank you. I will pass it to Erniko. You're on there, you're on there.
So I created my organization, Ours, Organized Uplifting Resources and Strategies. It started out as a college project for a class that I was trying to get out of faith-based nonprofit leadership at Wake Forest. And I sort of kind of set it on the back burner, but then recollecting like how I've been in these spaces, and a lot of people are often talking about what they're doing and looking at the funding and where the money was moving. And it's like all of these people saying, you know, the common language that I saw coming across in grants was that they were supporting environmental justice communities and doing things on behalf of Black people, which I learned to be, you know, a lie, because if it was like, how have we not progressed after all these years? How are communities not better after all this time, when people are getting millions and millions of dollars to do this work? And I was talking to somebody yesterday, and she was talking about her community and how in the 1950s and 60s, houses were worth $17,000, $18,000. It is 2022 and she's battling the same thing. And in her communities, these houses have not increased in their property value. And so it's like, how is it possible to have all of this money funneling through nonprofits and not see changes in communities? And so I wanted to do the work and being able to cut that red tape. And so I created my organization, and it even has a tagline, Organized Uplifting Resources and Strategies for Our Blood, for Our Land, for Our People. So I strictly work on behalf of Black folk. And when I walk in the room, by the time I finish talking, you'll know it. And it's important to have that story. It's important to be a part of the discussion. And it's not only important to have a seat at the table, but if they're not willing to give you a seat, build a damn table, which is what I did. And so it's important for us to show up, for us to be able to do our work. It's important for us to move together. Like Ms. Jacqui has a nonprofit, I have a nonprofit, Bishop Marcia has a nonprofit, Several other individuals on this call have nonprofits. And this is the beginning of that foundation laying, coming together, doing this. And not only this, but putting it on paper and getting on grants together, doing the work together, that collective, that number one, collaborative manifestation, that co-collaboration, that co-creation, that will bring about collective liberation for us all. And so moving in that vein and recognizing that we all are different people, but we all have that same one heartbeat. So allow us to move in love together and in sync with each other. Thank you.
I think I'm last, so I'm going to take this and I'm going to be brief, not like I said earlier. But I can only echo the sentiment of everybody that's gone ahead of me, and that I hope that in my work, I'm doing absolutely everything that you all have shared. But most importantly, I said to myself that one of the goals I had personally was to remain unbothered. I probably should not have said that because there's lots of days that I'm bothered, right? So working on that. But a part of building power, I think, is I'm challenging the people that I have contacts and communication with to not be oblivious, indifferent, or ignorant, and that any one of those three states can be changed. And that's a part of building power. Someone earlier mentioned that building power is akin to possessing knowledge. So if you're not oblivious to things, again, that challenges your privilege and your exposure. You can't be indifferent in that you can't assume, as Jacqui talked about. I can't imagine a community living without running water for 40 years and nobody caring. However, that's one of many that we've seen. So we've got to stop being indifferent to things that we're not personally experiencing and not be ignorant. Ignorance is not bliss, to a certain degree, because just because you're not aware of something does not mean that that thing does not exist and it's not negatively impacting the people around you. So as we say in my organization, when you agree with somebody, it's a +1 to everything that everybody said before me, but also making sure that I'm teachable, right? I can't do this work with a closed mind if I'm trying to reach other people and expect them to have an open mind. So thank you.
It's just been wrecking balls and mics and shattering all over the place in this closing part of the conversation. And I'd like to open it up for those who have been listening in. If you have questions, we can take a little bit for questions or comments, and then we will wrap up and give you back the rest of your Sunday. And you can raise your hand, Apostle Dr. Frederick.
Good morning, everyone. This is a day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. I want to thank all of you ladies for the wonderful jobs that you are doing in the spaces that you are in. You are vital to not only our community, but you are vital to humanity. I want to thank Bishop Marcia for inviting me to be a part of this great summit. And I just want to leave you with a few points here. One, all of the forces that are fighting what you do are in the area of control, money, and hierarchy. And that is where our problems exist. And it exists for all of us in every facet, whether it be government on the federal, state, or local levels, no matter what you, on your jobs, on your commissions, on whatever you do, those are the main ingredients that you will have to fight against. But having said that, I leave you with what your power really comes from. And it comes from Isaiah, the 41st chapter and the 10th verse. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. May the Lord add a blessing to the reading of his holy word. Let it be written, let it be so. God bless each and every one of you.
Thank you so, so much. Thank you. Is there anyone else who has a question or who would like to comment? Dr. Pressey, I see you came off mute.
Yes, good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to greet you with joy this morning. These last 2 days have been an eye-opener for me, standing from a leadership position. And I have been so encouraged by what I have heard and seen in each of the breakout sessions during this conference. And Bishop Marcia, I've only known you for a short period of time through the Midwest Builders Association, but I am truly blessed to have been invited to this conference. And as of this morning, what I have been hearing from each of you are dynamic leaders who are leading out of your pain and out of the bleeding of your experience. You have come this morning to let us to know that no matter what you are going through, you are still yet embracing the call and the mission that God has on your life. And that is what I've been hearing this morning, is that if we're going to be about equity, whether it is environmental, whether it is social, whether it is legal, we have to embrace it. And one of the ways that we embrace it, and the reason why I could remain quiet and listen, I'm reminded of the story of Job. Job was a righteous man, a man that had everything. He was a prosperous man, but yet one day he lost everything, physically, mentally, socially, and physically. And what happened to Job? There were many questions that came to him. Job, what happened? What did you do to cause all of this? And while Job was yet in his pain, his friends came to him, and the greatest power that his friends showed when they saw all the pain and all the grief that Job was going through, the word says the only thing that they could do was move to the power of silence. Sometimes when we see other people hurting, before we open up our mouths and begin to get into communication about what is going on, maybe we need to sit back and just be quiet and get into their space, become more empathetic about their situation. And then out of the silence comes the power from the heart to move and to do what we would do for ourselves. So I leave you with this: love yourself as you will love your neighbor, because love at the end of the day is the only thing that's going to bring peace, hope, and joy for a brighter future. And I want to thank you. Some of you on this line, Miss Brown, I was on a call with you a couple of days ago, and you were just as vibrant and motivated today as you were then. There's a couple of others that's on here. I can't see all the names right now, but I just felt that I just moved into a space of family. And I think it is Miss Patterson, part of the Black Women's Roundtable. I have been on many of those sessions, and I'm telling you, what is happening right now in this space is that we're all now beginning to embrace equity. And you can only embrace equity when it has been defined. And once it's been defined, then you can get motivated to sit at the table and negotiate whatever is on that table. You're not going to walk away until everyone is going to get a slice of that pie for the betterment of their community. Thank you so very much for allowing me to say what I have to say this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Apostle Dr. Pressey. Is there anyone else? There's a question or a comment. You can put it in the chat if you don't want to speak. And the power of silence. Shut your mouth, or as my son would say, shut the mouth. Just look, just listen, just watch. Yes.
Marcia, I thank you so much for this conference and this summit. And I have been moved mightily by the stories I've heard. And I look forward to sharing with you the opportunity to tell this story to a much wider audience through Reimagine Appalachia and through my own work. And I thank all of you so much for your openness. And I'd just like to remember that we are all creatures of this living earth. And if we don't preserve our home, then none of us survive. So blessed be to all of you.
Thank you, Patty, so much. Thank you. Okay, I am going to wrap us up. I thank you for staying for a little bit over. We got started a little late. Please note that all comments in the chat and verbally stated are so appreciated. And I don't know about everybody else, but they're going to sit with my heart today. And not in silence. I'm going to let it speak to me throughout this day as a reminder of that power doesn't always have to stand tall and bold. That power can sit silent and assess. That power can sit within us and be reminiscent and resonant. It is something that requires us to sit back and rest and to listen, so that we can be the co-creators and out-imagine and do things like Dr. Patterson has done, Chisholm Legacy Project, Commissioner Reverend Erniko Brown, starting hours, and as well as being an elected official and a community organizer. Dr. Melanie Meade, naturopath, mother, grandmother, advocate, and activist. Shana Goggins, community organizer, mother, Black woman, Appalachian.
Yes.
Mental health worker.
Yes.
Nora Elmarzouky. Senior manager for Energy Democracy. Cultural and artistic organizer.
Yes.
One who goes out and creates and builds plans nationwide.
Yes.
Attorney Ardie Griffin, who has moved through her pain and her trauma,
yes,
to stand up, to give people a voice, to give them power, to unmute the silent pain in their hearts, and showing them how to strategically become tacticians in ways that they knew not of. I want to thank each and every one of you, Akeisha Townsend, who also spoke powerfully about companion and assistive animals, and the fact that we forget that the very things that we take for granted are the very things that we need, that people need to live. For Shanta Reed and Megan Niebler, who used the power of the pen to help take notes. Because if we don't have people taking note, how do we get to synthesize this information and rinse and repeat it and build and create? For Joanne Kilgauer and Ben Hunkler with the Ohio River Valley Institute, who researches and goes into the weeds of things. And they support and they bring all things together for people to have, different levels of information dissemination that can build power. For our clergy here, who sit in front of people every Sunday, Wednesday, and depending on how many services you have in the day, but at the end of the day, for helping to realize and recognize that your people have power and that you too have a position of influence, a sphere of influence that you can shake and rattle the windows for elected officials and put barriers there until they do what they have been called to do. Patty DeMarco, who sits in office, but uses her voice not only as an elected official, but writes, who sits in the community of the hurting, the bleeding, and just sits silently and listens. She doesn't judge, who truthfully and empathetically comes with her whole self, no matter who you are, embraces you. For Dr. Shaniqua Smith, who's using her voice in the civic engagement fight, and who's building up in West Virginia, and who's standing tall with others like Crystal Good, who is also a part of BLAC. And for Linda Durrell, who sits in our meetings with Midwest Building Decarbonization, and you take back information. And for those of you that I don't know, because you're here, you're sitting, you're in position, and sometimes sitting and just being in position is powerful enough because you get to deploy what you've learned and what you've heard into your community. And so I just want you, in Taryn, looking at the fact of how you've shown up every day for little Black girls and Black women, who you can go back and let them know you matter. For sitting and taking note and being able to pass those love notes that each and every one of us have gleaned from today. So I just want to thank each and every one of you as you understand and sit in your position of power, your sphere of influence, as you are set about your day to radicalize and revolutionize love like none other, so that as we go forth, we follow the trails of the bleeding, we hear the cries of those who are in pain, and we show up, as Crystal Good said, just showing up shifts the atmosphere. So I thank you all for shifting the atmosphere this weekend. I thank you all for shaking, baking, quaking, rattling, and dropping the mic. I thank you all for your fierceness, for your boldness, for your kindness, for your generosity and your empathy. But more importantly, I thank you for being in rhythm with love. With love, because everything else will fail. But it says love never fails. It helps us to abound in grace and mercy. And it reminds us, as Dr. Patterson started out earlier today, we don't move from a place of scarcity. We move from a place of abundance. And that first place of abundance is abundant love. So again, I want to thank you for joining us, for being a part of our love note of change, for being an instrument of change. I want to thank each and every person who helped to put this policy summit together. I want to thank Motor Mouth for all of the work that they've done in the background. I want to thank our presenters and our panelists for being a part. I want to thank the funders who supported this work, the Heinz Endowment Foundation and McKnight Foundation. I want to thank each and every participant who has joined. I ask that you please go to our Facebook page and like and follow BLAC, y'all, but we will. And go to our website, blackappalachiancoalition.org. And there you can sign up to be a part, to receive our newsletter. It's always important for us as well to know how we've done. So I'm going to put a survey in the chat box. And I would ask that you complete it. If you have not completed it already, it'll only take you a few moments. This will let us know how we did. What do we need to do differently? It asks you, would you like to be involved with BLAC, and what are the ways that we can work together? We also ask that if you have a story to share, please go to our website and fill out our form, because we have an interactive story map where we are putting those stories on the story map. So individuals can use that as an interactive tool in their work, in the work that you do. It doesn't matter where you're from, doesn't matter if you're Black or white or if you're an immigrant. We need to memorialize our stories, and our stories need to be told. And so again, I just say thank you. I've been both honored and privileged to sit in this space. And I wish you all a wonderful, abundant, radicalized, revolutionary, loving day, week, months, and years. And just remember, showing up sometimes is just enough. Blessings to you all and have a great, wonderful day.
God bless you, Bishop.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, y'all.
All right. I will see you all on the other side.
All right,
Just
take
one
care.
tips. Check in with yourselves. It's been
Absolutely.
long 3 days. Your eyes might be itchy on the inside. You can put a cool compress, warm compress. Some of the breath work, look it up, because you all have done a wonderful work. So just take care of yourselves so that you can go the distance. I love
All
you.
right.
Appreciate
Well, I'm going to do that. Love you all.
See you all
you
soon.
on Tuesday for our check-in. All right.
Bye.